people who served militarily in Afghanistan since 2001, what are your thoughts on the current events, and therefore the previous 20 years? Serious. Attention, serious. Tag notice, jokes, puns, and off-topic comments are not permitted in any comment, parent or child. Parent comments that aren't from the target group will be removed, along with their child replies. Report comments that violate these rules, posts that have few relevant answers within the first hour, and posts that are not appropriate for the serious tag will be removed. Consider doing an AMA request instead. Thanks for your cooperation and enjoy the discussion. I am a bot, and this action was performed automatically. Please contact the moderators of this subreddit if you have any questions or concerns. You did, and I mean no offense by that. The vast majority of military personnel are upstanding, although maybe a little too idealistic individuals. The idea of the military having some grand beneficial purpose is a lie sold by a government that sees you as a tool so they can profit politically and monetarily. Me, when I left the military in 2010, as a veteran myself who entered service in 2011, there was absolutely no one I served with that is surprised by the turn of events. They dropped their weapons and ran, which is exactly what happened in Iraq when ISIS showed up. Everyone knew it was going to end this way. If you go back to the foundation of modern Afghanistan, it was really just a mountainous region full of warring tribes between the expanding Russian Empire in the north and the expanding British Empire coming up from India. They decided to create a buffer zone between the two empires, and lumped all those warring tribes into a country that, as you point out, never really existed. It would be like aliens come and create new countries on Earth, and you are now in the country that is a ring from a certain latitude north and south. How hard are you going to fight to keep Chicago and New York in the same country as Madrid, Rome, Baku, Tashkent, Beijing, and Pyongyang? What linguistic and cultural unity do you have with those compatriots? It's a reductive and simplistic way to look at it, but for like an elevator pitch, that's sort of what happened, if only by different means. The last thing the people of the region had to a unifying cultural idea before Taliban was the PDPA, and that wasn't even something in the hearts and minds of the entire region. Afghanistan isn't a country like you think of your own as. Afghanistan is a bunch of territories controlled by tribal leaders that the rest of the world collectively called Afghanistan. They don't see themselves as Afghani. Afghanistan is one of many countries that does not make sense as a state, but was the victim of colonial powers who knew nothing about it, carving it up like a cake. Families are divided by borders they had no say in creating. Who would fight for a state that was created to benefit your oppressors? Because they don't have the will to fight for something they never believed in to begin with. You can pour money and arms into an artificially formed group and call them an army if you wish. That does not make them an army. It's not about capability. They were capable. It was about will. They are not willing to risk their lives to protect U.S. interests. Let's face it. The majority of them were there for a paycheck in a country with few employment opportunities. They were not there for some kind of shared ideals. The tragedy is the continued fallacy U.S. administrations kept going with until reality showed everyone who was boss. Most of them should be fine. It's evacuation work in Kabul airport, which is full of NATO soldiers and the international community's embassies. It would be suicide for the Taliban to attack. I'll eat my shoes if it happens, especially considering they seem intent on having some kind of legitimacy on the world stage. I wouldn't be too sure. The Taliban keeps saying they've changed, and it sounds like an ex telling us they've changed when they really haven't. Maybe it'll turn out all well and good. But if what I keep hearing about the places that are already overrun is true, the U.S. had better start working on improving security measures as soon as possible. The United States also has cordial relations with Vietnam today and is considered a regional partner in the region. There is a very beneficial trade relationships between the two countries, a common foe in China and a large Vietnamese-American diaspora. I doubt we'll see the same with Afghanistan under the Taliban. I could see it becoming subservient to China. True, one can debate the pros and cons of Vietnam's economy, but it is unarguably a stable country with functioning institutions etc. But it wasn't immediately after the US pulled out. I'm not a historian but know that many North Vietnamese and others suffered terribly in the wake of US withdrawal. As horrific as that is to imagine, that was the beginning of Vietnam evolving into the country it is now. Had the US remained, the suffering of that war would have been prolonged and the additional suffering following the war would only have been delayed. I don't want to collude to the suffering ensuing right now and into the foreseeable future in Afghanistan. I shudder to think what the people there are facing, but this is where we were headed the moment we invaded. Better to rip the band-aid off. Spare everyone 20 more years of endless war and hope that Afghanistan can come to a better place. If we can help them get there in a real way, we should, but 20 years of troops and bombs hasn't helped to create a functioning state. 20 more years won't either. Note, I think the original post was for people who served in Afghanistan. That's not me. I'm just an opinionated guy on the internet. I knew a French doctor who served with Medicine Sans Frontières in Vietnam maybe 5 years ago. He showed me a photo of the hospital kitchen. It was a bare concrete box with a woman cleaning stuff in a plastic basin squatting on the floor. When they needed medicine, he would write a note of what was needed, and then the family of the patient had to go out and buy the drugs themselves. He saw whole families trying to scrap the cash together every day. Not what I would call a killer economy. Anyway, he loves the country and wants to go back, but it was brutally poor. Served 2 stints over there. I'm sad for the people who were optimistic that better days were ahead, but I also don't know of a solution that doesn't involve a permanent US military presence. The situation was pretty much fucked from the beginning. There was never a realistic plan. On one of my deployments I became friends with a Lebanese man who managed some of the workers on base. He told me that Americans think the world wants to be America, when most countries just want to be left to chart their own course. His words came back to me today watching Kabul. He told me that Americans think the world wants to be America, when most countries just want to be left to chart their own course. His words came back to me today watching Kabul. I had a coworker several years ago insisting that all these other countries should be grateful for the things we give them, and I responded, did they ask for those things? Were they actually even useful to them? Didn't matter. He was just focused on how we were sharing our innate wholesomeness. I spent just over 4 years there as both military and a civilian. I understand the process of how we got there, why we did all the things we did, and ultimately why we failed. And I also understand the sunken cost bias and the need to break ties with Afghanistan in a definitive manner. However, this feels awful. This feels not only wasteful, but disrespectful in a soul-shaming manner, both to the Americans we sent there, and the people there who believed in us. So much fail. It's hard to comprehend. It's just so sad seeing all the thousands of people trying to flee, knowing that there are hundreds of girls and women who are now being enslaved by the Taliban. This was the obvious outcome since the moment the withdrawal was announced. I'm utterly stunned, and I'm not even a veteran, and I don't know if it's immense sadness or anger, but the initial reason we went in, the threat of terrorism, has now returned as the training camps will soon reconstitute. How soon until we have to intervene again? There's an emotional trigger that I keep stumbling over. On the one hand, you have the practical matters. No, we couldn't pop up an expensive client state forever. Yes, there's plenty of blame to go around and picking a side is pointless. No, Afghanistan was never going to be a success by any definition. Not if they folded like a lawn chair the second the Americans pulled out. But the actual and the moment reality of it feels very different. Right now, the front page of Reddit is wallpapered with images of that plane taking off with Afghanis clinging to the outside. Obviously that's going to live in a very different part of the brain than the political reality that got us here. I'm sure we had a genuine and workable moral rationale for pulling out of Vietnam as well, but all anyone remembers is the helicopter on the roof of the embassy in Saigon. That's the thing that bothers me most of all. The translators, probably the most heroic of the bunch, are being left there to get shot in the back of the head. It's despicable the United States can't get them out, put them on a plane, relocate them to the United States, and then work on getting them visas. I know that's simplifying an issue, but it all looks like a policy failure to me. My friend was an Army Ranger in Afghanistan. He told me about a school that was built with British money as part of a care package/rebuilding process. He said it was the only building in the area that looked like a Western building. It had been used as a school for a short period of time. When he got there, the Taliban had forced the school closed and they were using it for their purposes. The Taliban would fire on them from the building. He laser-guided a missile into that school. The lesson was you can't just build a school in Afghanistan and accept to be used as a school. I remember when I knew the whole situation was fucked. I was on the NATO headquarters base, and I happened to be talking to an ANA colonel during a ceremony for a monument dedicated to the fallen NATO soldiers. And he told me very matter-of-factly, when you leave we will take all of these statues and melt them down for scrap. We will rip the copper wiring out of these buildings to sell for scrap. I was shocked. This compound must have cost $1 billion, and this guy was casually admitting that he would ruin the entire thing to get maybe $100,000 for himself. Pakistan trained them, supplied them with funding and arms. It is even working to ensure countries recognize the Taliban as a legitimate authority, even though the Taliban has been known to be behind several bomb attacks on Pakistan. How can a democratically elected government do this to its own citizens? And the US's policy has been, essentially, hey guys, we wanna be friends cause we need bases nearby, so we're gonna look the other way while you develop WMDs in your laughably unstable country, shake our finger at your ignoral of terrorist cells in your country, and dump tons of money and guns into your country so long as you pinky promise that it will all get to where it's supposed to go, okay? To answer for my stepdad, since he doesn't use this kind of thing, he honestly doesn't care anymore. He lost plenty of friends, still has trouble with loud booms, babies or pets crying, and some random other things. He doesn't talk about his time serving, and generally is antisocial. He just wants to be alone, and politics or news like this mean nothing anymore. I do too. He's only opened up a little about some stories, and honestly they disturb me deeply just hearing them. He's lucky to be around. Some of his friends perished in a bunker explosion. He was the only one who lived out of that group because he was at the door and got blown back outwards by the force. I know those stories replay in his mind over and over, burned into it. You can tell by his mannerisms he tries to be jokey and fun, but when alone in his little man cave he is just trying to forget it all. But of course I appreciate it, and I know he would too. I really hope he get better. I hope that time washes some of that away somehow so he can be truly happy. My deepest hope is that this is Vietnam after Saigon falls, or Rwanda post-genocide. That is the start point that leads to genuine nation building and the establishment of a native Afghan government seen as legitimate by the whole country. I wholeheartedly agree with you here. Afghanistan can do with some stability, even if it comes from the Taliban. I just sincerely hope women are allowed to study, work, and accorded at least the basic human rights. One of the things tempering my hopes is that I do not think this new Taliban is entirely unified and on the same page in terms of policy. The top brass are largely saying the right things, but how much control do they really have over regional commanders, or the rank and file? Even in the best case, Taliban conduct is going to vary until the new central government can exert control, and in the worst case, it will never properly gain full control over its own people and will see civil war between Taliban factions. A lot of good points. I think there were a handful of videos the Taliban shared of private residences of military generals. Full of gold and luxury, TVs, cars. In regards to where did all the money go? So the Anna was rotting from the inside already, but those 20 years of influence hopefully planted some seeds in the population, even if just in those from the cities. A whole generation of people who may already be parents themselves grew up under the foreign influence. Also not just US influence. Up until 2020 it was troops from 36 countries. If anything, it showed how different cultures could live door to door. I wasn't in Afghanistan, but a close relative did numerous stints as aircraft mechanic for the German Air Force. We didn't get to pick the people who would work with us, and while a lot were just people who wanted a better life for themselves and their families, a lot were not necessarily the ones you'd pick if you had a choice. AWK, the president's brother and the man who ran Kandahar when I was there, was a straight-up gangster. Tony Soprano made flesh, but he was a gangster and he brought a lot to the table. So what you gonna do? We'd rather work with him than fight him. Yet at the same time, the criticism that we were working with gangsters, well, that's legit. We were using each other for our own ends. I keep thinking about Vichy France and Batman. We categorically were not the Nazis. We weren't there for conquest, nor were we secretly murdering millions of people on an industrial scale. We were not the bad guys in an absolute frame of reference, but we were trying to set up a government friendly to us, and we would use deadly force to protect them and ourselves, never punitively. We didn't slaughter villages to punish them for supporting the Taliban. But deadly force is a blunt instrument, and no matter how hard we might try otherwise, collateral damage happened. So if I'm a teenage Pashtun from Tribe A, do I join the French resistance or the Vichy government? If I'm the Afghan Bruce Wayne, when I suit up as Afghan Batman, am I trying to take down the Taliban, or the gangsters working with the foreign invaders? I don't know. I'm proud of my time there. I'm proud of most of the stuff we did. I saw the improvements with my own eyes, and I know for an absolute fact that a generation of Afghans had a better life, at least for a while, because we were there. Yet at the same time, there are legit criticisms that can be directed our way. Every Roto is Roto Zero chief among them. Armies are not good at nation building and reconstruction. Armies break things far better than build things. We need a national agency that specializes in failed state reconstruction, and the army needs to be seconded to it once the initial fight is over. The accusation that senior officers saw Afghanistan tours as a ticket to be punched on the road to promotion is largely unfair. But not totally unfair. I saw examples of good and bad leadership, and I feel like my nation pulled out too early, because we were so much better at the soft skills than the Americans and so got more done while pissing less people off, and yet our Kandaks rolled over just as fast, so maybe that wasn't enough. Afghanistan Ghana Afghanistan. Follow-up question for people: is there any way, after we invaded, you could have seen this not turn out this way? Could this have been a fruitful nation-building exercise if we had tried something different? Is this an issue with American military leadership or administrative, engineering strategy? Did the Afghan people simply feel lukewarm at best to our idea of liberal democracy, and it would just never be the sort of thing they'd be motivated to defend in the long run? I was 7 when we invaded the country and obviously had no say in that choice. But I'm wondering if moving forward I as a voter need to learn lessons from this. The issue was never with the military leadership of the US. but more to do with administrative ignorance and lack of a clear vision and goal. Additionally, President Bush had a grudge against Saddam Hussein's Iraq and used the war on terror as an excuse to invade to go looking for Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, which didn't exist. Bush's CIA, State Department, etc. all assured him that Iraq was building WMDs without any proof whatsoever, because that's what the boss wanted to hear. When the US invaded Iraq, Afghanistan got sidelined so hard it wasn't even in the stadium anymore. It wasn't sexy enough for the big dogs in Washington to care about because big flashy fighting was happening in Iraq. Afghanistan was boring because the Taliban government had been toppled in weeks and US troops were sweeping up the last hillbillies out in the mountains. Not sexy at all like Iraq with its tanks and air force and stuff. So Afghanistan was forgotten, and no serious nation building was implemented. Any national government that was set up in Afghanistan was set up with the sole purpose of serving their American overlords and delivering a steady supply of Taliban, Al-Qaeda captives, not a government that was ready for independence. Also, Pakistan sucks. I highly recommend reading Steve Cole's Ghost Wars to understand how the US and CIA first got involved with Afghanistan, Q's communism. Then read his Directorate S, which is everything from 9/11 to 2018.